recording. As I said to some of you already, this class compared to last month's class will be very simple. It's ironic how simple it'll be compared to the fact that it's one of the most important classes that we'll have because of the nature of the topic. Alright, so we've got the sign-in sheets finishing up. Everybody should have signed in. Again, like I said, I am recording. Hello to everybody out there in branch land. So we're going to talk about lockout tagout, we'll be pretty quick with it. Who in here can tell me, anybody, give me your definition or your understanding of what lockout tagout is? Anybody?
It's anytime someone's working on a machine that needs to be locked out, and then it be tagged by the person that's working on it, and the lock cannot be removed except for by the one that's working on it. That way it's assured that no one else will be able to start the machine up until they're completely finished with it.
Okay, good. So Larry touched on one of the most, a couple aspects of lockout tagout. One of the most important things he mentioned is so that no one basically can be hurt by what's happening. And we're locking out what? What is, in one word, what is it we're locking out?
Power.
Energy. Power. Yeah. Energy. We use the term energy. Power is another word for it, but sometimes power you think maybe only electrical power. Any type of energy. So really what we're going to look at in a little bit is the fact that the thing I want you to come away with from this class for lockout tagout is that we are isolating and controlling the energy to prevent injury or death. So isolating or controlling energy, it's crazy because energy, injury. I'm going to isolate and control energy to prevent injury or death. There's 3 levels to lockout tagout. Does anybody know what those levels are? We have non-affected, affected, and authorized. Right, so we'll talk about those. I'm going to guess from the lack of response that very few of you know what level of authorization you have, what level of training you have. It's important that you know that. The reason it's important, several years ago at our Charlotte facility, OSHA came in and did an inspection. They inspected everything from A to Z. In the midst of that list, one of the things they inspected or asked questions about was our lockout tagout program. Literally 2 weeks to the day after we had done lockout tagout training that year, OSHA showed up. They asked one of the forklift drivers, have you been through lockout tagout training? He got the deer in the headlights look on his face, no idea what that meant, and said, I don't know. He said, well, do you know what level of training you have or what level you are? No. Now just 2 weeks before he'd been through the training, we got fined about $1,500 because we had not properly trained our employees in lockout tagout. Even though we had had the training, I can only assume that we did not do an effective job of training because we had an employee who had been through it, didn't know that he'd been through it, didn't know what it was, and didn't know what level of training they had. So we failed. It's important that you come away from this class today knowing that you have been through this class, you have been lockout tagout trained, and that you know what level of training you have. So we will discuss all of that. We asked the question, what's the big deal? What's the big deal about lockout tagout? Well, some of you have already read the story on the front of the handout that you've got in front of you about a Bumblebee Tuna employee and how Bumblebee was fined a total, or pay out a total of $6 million because of an accident that occurred. Now, without reading the whole story, I'll tell you the long and the short of it is a maintenance guy came in early one morning to do some work in one of the ovens. Relatively small oven. I think that it talked here about the fact that the oven was about, 4 feet wide by, about 20 feet long and maybe 4 feet deep. Actually, it was 3 foot. 3 foot by 54 inch. So it was a relatively 36 foot, relatively small oven, at least compared to what we've got out here. Well, he crawls up in it and starts doing some work on it. and he doesn't lock out the equipment, he doesn't tag out the equipment, he doesn't notify any employees, he's just in there working on it. And he's working and working. The operators show up for the beginning of their shift, and this is where the story gets horrific. The operator comes in, assumes maintenance man number one is in the restroom because they don't know where he's at. They proceed to dump 12,000 pounds of tuna in this oven that he's inside of, and they turn it on to cook the tuna. And they cooked Mr. Jose Molina in that oven, 270 degrees, and he literally was cooked alive. All because he didn't take a minute or two to lock out and tag out the equipment. I mean, a minute or two would have saved his life. And talk about a horrendous death. I mean, this guy, he knew at a very quick moment in time, he knew he was fixing to die. And die a slow, miserable death. Cooked alive because he didn't take a couple minutes to protect himself. And that's what lockout tagout is about. It's about isolating the ability for energy to harm you or kill you. We don't want that to happen. You don't want that to happen. We give you the tools as authorized employees and as affected employees. We're giving out the tools and the training to prevent that from happening. In this case, the plant manager was fined, the safety director was fined, criminal charges were brought against them for allowing this man to have been killed as a result of this accident. So yes, it really is that important. So first up, I want us to talk about the 3 levels of training. I asked you right at the very beginning, there are 3 levels. Do you know what level you are? There's 3 levels. The first level is non-affected personnel. There is no one in this room that is non-affected. Most of our non-affected employees would be sales personnel, administrative, operational personnel, who do not, in the normal course of their job, in any way, shape, or form, come into contact with energized equipment. Equipment that has energy coming to it or energy in it. Most everybody in this room, however, is a level 2 affected employee, meaning you work around equipment that does have energy coming to it, that does get locked out, tagged out of service for a variety of reasons from time to time, and you are affected by that process. So I would dare say everybody in here is level 2 affected employee. The third level is authorized. Authorized employees are the employees who are trained and authorized to use the equipment to safely lock out and tag out machinery or energized equipment. So you're one of those 3. Again, I believe I can safely say primarily authorized employees are maintenance personnel. Primarily. We do have some operators, machine operators, who are authorized to lock their equipment out. But primarily it's maintenance. So you should be able to walk away from this class when we're done going, yes, I've been through my 2015 lockout tagout training, and I'm a level 2 employee. Level 2 meaning I'm affected but not authorized. So the fancy name for lockout tagout is an energy control program. We don't call it that. We call it lockout tagout. It's written lockout tagout, and I say that a lot of times you'll just see LOTO, lockout tagout, LOTO. And but what it actually is an energy control program. As I mentioned before, the most specific definition of lockout tagout is isolating and controlling energy to prevent accidental injury or death. Okay, so 2 aspects: locking out or controlling and isolating energy to prevent injury or death. Now, examples of reasons. Some of you are looking at it there already. Reasons that we would lock out a piece of equipment: repairing it, cleaning it, adjusting it, setting it up, or doing preventative maintenance. Those are the primary reasons, the main reasons that a piece of equipment would need to be locked out, tagged out of service. Now there's 2 primary types of energy that we deal with. We deal with kinetic energy and potential energy. Potential energy is very self-explanatory. Kinetic energy, however, is a fancy word for energy that's in use. Right now, all these lights above have kinetic energy in them. Now, they're de-energized, so they do not have energy in them. They're not kinetic. Right now, they don't even have potential energy. The potential energy is right here in this light switch. So we have potential energy here. We have kinetic energy there. Okay, so that's the difference in the two types. So the first place that we could interrupt, safely control, and isolate this kinetic energy and cause it to be potential would be at that light switch. And we have a device that could go on that light switch that would cause it to stay in the off position and thereby make it safe to work on these lights. So we want to isolate or control the energy at the point that its potential stops. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a minute. That's just a very simple example for you. Now there's numerous energy sources, 10 or more energy sources out there, but for Spectra, for what we would normally encounter, we're going to talk very briefly about 5 of them. And those 5 are on the bottom of the page that you've got there. Mechanical energy, gravity, electrical, hydraulic, and pneumatic. Pneumatic being air. Gravity is one we tend to forget about. Now, can you give me an example? What do you think an example of mechanical energy might be?
Forklift.
Forklift. The energy is actually created by a combination of things. You know, you've got an alternator providing energy that comes about through the combustion of the engine, and so all of this works together to create a mechanical type of energy. Gravity. Can you think of a type, maybe even here at Spectra, an example of gravity created energy?
Stacks of coils that could fall.
Well, that's a real good one. Stacks of coils that could fall. What about and that literally, yeah, that's not something we could lock out, but that is a type of gravity on a piece of equipment that can be locked out where we could control that. What type of, can you think of a piece of equipment that has gravity involved? But the presses. When a press is in the, they cycle and they go up and they come down. They go up and they come down. So when they're in the up position, there's a number of things that can cause them to come down, but one of those is gravity. As simple as that. The presses have other sources of energy. We'll talk about that in a minute, but gravity is one we don't want to overlook. Electrical, obvious, a lot like the light switch or something you plug in the wall. Hydraulic, we use hydraulic energy on our roll forming machines and on the paint line. And then lastly, pneumatic, air energy. We use air on the presses and roll forming, on the paint line. Very common source of energy here at Spectra. Those are the 5 most common types. Now looking at general lockout tagout information. There's 4 elements to lockout tagout. The first element is training. It's what we're doing here right now. Every month, pretty much in our classes that we have, we talk about the fact that training is required. And we do our required training as a part of our monthly safety meetings. This month, we're covering the required lockout tagout training. So that's done right now. The second element to lockout tagout program is energy control procedures. You see some of these packets of information that we have here. And in these packets, which are customized for each piece of equipment, paint line finish oven. There's another one for the lathe. Each one of these is associated with equipment for maintenance or authorized personnel to work from. And in here is a 1-page process or procedure for properly locking out and tagging out that piece of equipment. So this is the second critical element to effective lockout tagout. The third element is the actual hardware and devices. Everything ranges from pieces of equipment here that are designed for light switches and for breaker boxes, the actual locks that go on the equipment, different type of hasps, and other pieces of equipment. Several pieces that you'll need to get familiarized as time goes on. Excuse me as I try to keep myself from getting a dry throat here. Periodic inspections are the last aspect. Once a month, I go through and I pay attention to someone who is authorized, who is performing lockout tagout, and walk through the process with them to make sure that they're doing everything correctly. And I document that, so that's the periodic inspection. So those 4 elements are part of an effective lockout tagout program. On the bottom here, take a look at these. We've got several basic policies and procedures for lockout tagout. Art, would you read that first one for us?
Where we at, sir?
Right here.
Okay. Any personnel authorized, affected or non-affected, who sees a hazardous condition which they believe needs to be placed out of service should immediately notify a manager, the supervisor, or authorized personnel. If possible, post a co-worker near a hazardous condition but out of harm's way until a manager, supervisor, or an authorized person arrives. To ensure other personnel do not attempt to operate their equipment or expose themselves or others to danger.
Very good, thank you. Give me a chance to get my locking gear going here. Pull that joker off the stick. So exactly what we've got there. If you see a hazardous condition, it's your responsibility to let the right person know. Post someone there, have a coworker stay there out of harm's way, but adjacent to the hazard, and let someone know. Any personnel authorized, affected, or non-affected who sees a tag out. You see a piece of equipment that's got a tag on it, says it's out of service, you need to respect this tag. You need to respect the person who placed it there. The example I like to give is if Casey comes into work on Thursday morning and TJ says, Casey, I need you to go cut up that wood for me over there. Casey goes over, he finds the skill saw, and lo and behold, on the skill saw is hanging this tag. And he looks at it, he's like, man, TJ really wants this done, it's the only saw we got. Well, the cord looks fine, and looks like the nut's good and tight on the saw blade, and you know, the blade's on, and it's not loose, everything seems fine. It probably doesn't mean anything, and he ignores this and goes about trying to do his work. We can't do that. You cannot assume that this doesn't mean what it says, which is danger, do not operate. Every tag should have the manager or the authorized personnel's name who is working on that equipment. Go to them, ask them, go to maintenance, say, Corey, I saw your name on the bottom of a tag on that skill saw over there at 995 LaGrange. I really need to use that skill saw. What's going on? Corey said, man, I'm really glad you didn't, because you can't see it. But yesterday it shorted out, sparks flew out of that joker, scared everybody. I'm not sure what's wrong, but there's some kind of short inside of it. And so that's why it's tagged. So respect the tag, because you may look at the equipment and not see that it needed, why it's tagged out, but it's tagged out for a reason. So you need to always respect the tag. You should never bypass that tag, alter the tag, remove the tag, you know, or otherwise try to override the lockout and tag out equipment that is on a piece of equipment. You must trust it and respect it. And definitely do not attempt to use it if it's tagged out of service. Alright, over on the next page, see we got our friend here, Mr. Homer Simpson there. He notices a lockout tag out on a fan switch. He looks over and sees one of his co-workers working on a fan, and it may be that he's tempted to turn that thing on, but he's going to respect that it's locked out, and he's not going to be able to turn it on. We've got to respect lockout tag out. No matter how much of an inconvenience you may think it creates for you that you're unable to use the piece of equipment, you've got to respect that piece of equipment. You need to be familiar with all types of lockout tagout devices. Like I said, we've got several of them right here. You'll see several more pictured on the bottom of this page. Be familiar with these devices. What each of these devices is telling you, visually and with words, is do not use, danger, out of service. Affected personnel are typically floor managers, packers, material handlers, custodial personnel, and some machine operators. The reason I say some are affected is because some may be authorized to actually perform lockout tagout. Now, for authorized personnel, of whom I think there is none in here, but I still want you to be aware, I think OC actually some paint line supervisors may be authorized to lock out equipment. But every person who's authorized to lock out should have locks of their own. That way, the keys to those locks are on your keychain, and when you're in harm's way, you have those keys with you, so you are confident that nobody can remove the lock that is protecting you because you have the only key. It's critical. Otherwise, lockout tagout doesn't work. If the key is in a box, accessible to everybody, to a lock that is protecting you, then you're not protected. In so much as anybody can get that key and go, what the heck's this lock doing here? I can take this thing off. I need to work. So, always use a lock that you have full control over. Our desire at Spectra is to ensure that everyone who is authorized has their own lockout tagout kit, whether it's a tiny kit, a large box like this, or a more thorough, complete workstation. So even in your case, so see, if you need locks, if each supervisor needs 2 locks and 2 keys, tell me, I will get you each your own locks and your own keys, and that way you have total, absolute control over your safety when you're in harm's way. You never want to depend on somebody else's equipment. If more than one person is working on the same piece of equipment, you'll see here in this picture in particular, using this device, up to 5 people could have their locks on this equipment. Right here you see where 2 have it. There's 2 people working on that equipment. Each of them is protected. If authorized person number 1 removes their lock, but number 2 is still in the machine working, number 2 is still protected because his lock's still on there. That's why we have devices like this that'll hold 6 locks, devices like this that'll hold 5 locks, to ensure that if multiple people are working on an individual situation, each one of you has control with that key in your pocket over your own safety. It was asked in the last class, a great question. If 2 people are working on a piece of equipment, one of them finishes up, the other one's still locked out, come the end of the shift, that person's going home, but the second shift comes in, they're going to start working on it. What do? You just give them your key? No. They have their own lock. They put their lock on before you take your lock off. That way that machine is not unlocked at any point in time when it's not ready to operate. Alright. There are 5 steps to successful lockout tagout. There are also 5 steps to successful completion of lockout tagout, making the full 10-step process. So let's take a look at the 5 steps to successful lockout tagout. Now they're nice and cute. They all say, tag out, check out, lockout, phase out, try out. First thing you want to do is tag it out. Tag the equipment out of service, and then you notify all the affected people in that area that this equipment is being taken out of service for repair, for setup, for adjustment, whatever the case may be. Then secondly, you check out. Check out, you pull your piece of paper that we talked about before, and you familiarize yourself with what kind of energy you're dealing with, how much energy, where it's located, what you need to do to successfully lock it out, and then the steps that you're going to take to successfully complete the lockout tagout process. Next, you actually lock out. You lock out the energy sources one at a time, remembering that there may be more than one. A lot of our presses work off air and electricity, and we have gravity. So you may have as much as 3 different types of energy sources that you need to isolate or control in the lockout process. Once you've locked out each of those, disconnected them and locked them out, then you're going to phase out. For example, if you've got an airline coming to a piece of equipment, I unhook the airline and I lock that airline out, Have I eliminated all dangers associated with pressurized air? No. Why? Because there could be, and probably will be, a storage of air built up in that piece of equipment. So we've got to bleed, or in this case, phase out that existing stored energy. It's only potential, but because it's stored in the equipment, it could fire off. It could cause it to cycle. So we need to bleed off any energy that's stored up in the machine. And that's called phasing out. Then the last thing you want to do is try out. Once everything is done, everybody's cleared from the area, everything is locked out, everything's been bled off, you want to make sure that the area is clear of employees. No one's in harm's way. Try to cycle that piece of equipment. Hit the on button. Hopefully nothing happens. Then you know you've not only successfully locked out, but you've phased out or bled off any stored energy before you then place yourself in harm's way. Now once you've completed your work, the repair, the setup, the adjustment, whatever the case may be, once you've completed that, now there's 5 steps to correct completion of lockout tagout. So once the servicing of equipment has been completed and you are the last authorized person to pull your lock off of the equipment, here's what you should do. You clear the area of all personnel. Check and double check to ensure that everyone is gone. Remove all doubt. Don't assume somebody's in the restroom. Don't assume somebody is at lunch. Account for everybody and make sure the area is clear. Then you can remove the actual lockout equipment, the devices and equipment. Once you've done that, power up energy sources one at a time. If there's 2 or 3, power up one. After you've checked and made sure the area is still clear, you power up one, check, make sure the area is clear, power up 2, check, make sure the area is clear, power up 3. You're constantly checking to make sure there's nobody in harm's way. Because for 3 hours or 6 hours or 3 days, this equipment has been being serviced, out of service, people got it in their head, it's safe to walk through here because this is de-energized, it's not operating. Now all of a sudden, it's no longer safe, so you got to keep checking to make sure nobody's in harm's way. If necessary, sound the horn or the alarm. Like on the paint line, we have a bell that we sound that lets everybody know that we're fixing to start the line up. Next, you attempt to cycle the equipment. After you've done that, once you're certain that the equipment is functioning properly and safely, then, lastly, you remove the tag and you notify all affected personnel that the equipment is now back in service. Now, when the operator of that equipment shows up and starts to operate it, they too want to check and make sure all their co-workers are aware of the fact that the equipment is back in service. Somebody might have been at lunch. Somebody might have, and they may not know that the equipment's come back in service. So they may walk right through it not knowing. Now, so guards should be back up, chains should be back up. That's on the operator to make sure that guards are back in place. Chains, everything's back in place and functioning. You know, everyone knows this equipment is no longer locked out, it's now operational. So check, and double check to make sure all personnel is accounted for before you start equipment back up. Remember, no authorized employee should remove lockout tagout equipment without first ensuring the equipment is clear of all personnel, and no one should remove lockout tagout equipment except the person who placed it there. Okay? One last thing in wrapping up for authorized personnel. I've seen these used to close personal lockers, holding chains in place, on lunch boxes. These, in order for us to respect equipment, it must always be used properly. If we improperly use a lock that says danger, locked out, do not remove, and we start using this on a locker, then it devalues the seriousness of what this lock means. So don't ever improperly use lockout tagout equipment except for the purpose for which it is designed. Now lastly, I do like to mention that outside contractors, our expectations for ABC Electrical when they come in here to work is our same expectations we have for our employees. They need to be trained, and authorized before they do work on our equipment. That's for their protection and for yours. So we do set those same standards for them. If an electrician is coming on site to do work, I require proof that they have been trained. Just like if they're going to operate a forklift, or go into confined spaces, or work around chemicals, they have to provide proof to us that they've had that training as well. So you know we hold them to the same standard that we hold you to. So, any questions? Told you it was a pretty simple class. Alright, what we want to do now is we want to take our evaluation